The alien Admiral strode through the corridors of the human research station, their boots clicking sharply against the metallic floors. With each step ahead, their mind was focused on the task ahead. The Admiral had been to many worlds and witnessed many species growing, evolving. Some were quick to rise to power, others languished in their stagnation. But humanity intrigued them. Something about their rapid advancement caught their eye, something about their fire, the relentless push forward. The Admiral had learned to respect that kind of drive in any species. So when the report came in about the human children training simulations, the Admiral had to see it for themselves. They were told to expect a new form of military training, one designed for the younger generation with the potential to create future commanders. But the Admiral thought little of it. Surely the games of children would be nothing to worry about. So far in their travels, the Admiral had seen little to impress them about the humans, a species with potential, yes, but still so young, not even scratching the surface of what the stars could offer. Still, they had to investigate this program. The Admiral moved with purpose toward the control room, where the simulations took place. As they entered the room, their gaze immediately shifted toward the screens before them. They expected to see an assortment of children, laughing, enjoying themselves, playing war games like any species would. The simulators had been designed for the young ones to experience space battles in controlled environments. But what they saw instead shocked them. Before the Admiral sat a young human, no more than 10 years old. The child was completely focused, their eyes glued to the screen. As their hands moved across the control panels, the Admiral was used to seeing older species training young officers. But never had they witnessed something like this. The child didn't laugh or smile. There was no joy in their face, only focused determination. The screen in front of them was filled with stars, asteroids, and a fleet of ships, an array of alien designs, ones that seemed to threaten the child's fleet. The Admiral watched closely, wondering if this was some kind of mistake. This was no ordinary game, not from the child's posture, not from the way they commanded the simulated ships. It was as though the child understood the weight of command, the importance of every move they made. The Admiral could see it now. The child's ship responded to the battle commands, expertly weaving through incoming fire, dodging precise attacks, and striking back with perfect timing. Each movement was deliberate, calculated. But they were just a child. Surely this couldn't be real. The Admiral thought. Their eyes narrowed as they leaned forward, watching the child closely. No hesitation, no fear. Each decision came swiftly, as if the child was born for this. This wasn't some simple war game. This was strategy on another level. The Admiral stood there for a moment, contemplating, unsure of what they were witnessing. Did the humans possess something no one else had, something far more dangerous than the Admiral had given them credit for? There was no way this could be just a game. The Admiral leaned closer to the control panel, their eyes locked onto the child's movements. Every press of a button, every adjustment of the console, seemed to be executed with a precision that was unnerving. The child's fingers moved as if they had memorized every inch of the interface. Every command felt instinctive. The Admiral could feel a growing unease in their gut as the child's fleet engaged the enemy. The Admiral had assumed this was just another simple training exercise, a chance for the child to learn basic tactics and strategies. Yet the child was treating this as if it were a real battle. The enemy fleet was formidable, far beyond the reach of any human ships. Yet the child showed no signs of fear, no signs of hesitation. They were unfazed by the overwhelming odds. The Admiral's mind raced as they processed what they were seeing. The child was maneuvering their simulated fleet with an unnatural level of expertise, their ships gliding through space, avoiding incoming fire, as if they were in perfect harmony with the universe itself. The enemy ships attempted to outflank the child's fleet, but the child countered with moves that were so unexpected, so fluid. It was as if the child could predict the enemy's every move before they even made it. Each calculated strike landed with devastating effect. The child's fleet was slowly chipping away at the enemy's numbers. The Admiral watched with growing disbelief. How could this be possible? How could a child with no formal training display such mastery over the battlefield? The simulation's artificial intelligence began to adjust its strategies, trying desperately to adapt to the child's tactics. But it too was outmatched. The Admiral had seen countless species attempt to defeat simulations like this, but none had come close to the skill this child displayed. It was as if the child was more than a participant in the game. They were the one writing the rules. Every move was unpredictable, yet entirely effective. The Admiral could not tear their gaze away from the screen. The child's calm demeanor only made the experience more surreal. This was not a child playing a game. This was a commander in the making. The simulation intensified as the enemy's fleet grew larger and more aggressive. The child's fleet was outnumbered, but the child showed no sign of panic. They adjusted their approach, once more using the terrain of the asteroid field nearby to create false readings, hiding their fleet in plain sight. The Admiral could only marvel at how quickly the child adapted, how they seemed to be thinking 2 steps ahead of the simulation's artificial intelligence. The enemy fleet attempted to rush the child's remaining ships, but the child had already set a trap, using the debris field to launch an ambush. The simulation's program had no chance against this level of strategic thinking. The enemy ships were decimated one by one, and with each victory, the Admiral could not shake the realization that the child had done what most experienced officers could not do. They had turned the tide of battle with raw ingenuity and instinct. The Admiral's respect for the child was undeniable, but so too was the growing concern humanity had something more within them than anyone had expected, something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The child ended the simulation with a flourish, the last enemy ship exploding in a blaze of light. The Admiral stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The room was silent save for the hum of the control panels. The child leaned back in their seat, smiling with satisfaction, but the Admiral felt a deep unease. This was no ordinary child. This was something new, something humanity had that no one else had realized, yet a spark of brilliance that could one day change everything. The Admiral's heart raced as the child leaned back in the chair, their small fingers still idly tapping the console, as though the simulation had been no more than a casual stroll through space. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet awe that filled the room, and the Admiral couldn't help but feel as though they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The child's performance had been flawless, but it was more than just technical skill. It was instinct, an uncanny ability to read the battlefield, to anticipate, to outmaneuver. For a moment, the Admiral considered leaving, but something held them in place. The Admiral approached the child, who had already restarted the simulation. The child didn't seem to notice, entirely absorbed in the next challenge. The Admiral cleared their throats softly, catching the child's attention. "Are you ready for another battle?" the Admiral asked, their voice calm but laced with curiosity. The child smiled up at them, the confidence in their eyes unmistakable. "Always." The Admiral felt a flicker of respect, mixed with something darker. They had seen species with vast fleets, planets full of soldiers trained for war, but this child was operating on a level that defied explanation. "Let's make things a little more challenging," the Admiral murmured to themselves as they tapped a series of commands into the control panel, enhancing the difficulty of the simulation. They added new obstacles, increased the number of enemy ships, and pushed the difficulty levels to their limits. The simulation began again, and the child immediately took control with the same precision as before. The Admiral had expected the child to falter under the increased pressure, to make a mistake, to struggle with the added complexity. But they did not. The enemy ships launched an aggressive assault, their tactics designed to overwhelm the child's fleet, but the child reacted swiftly, adapting to the new threats with ease. The Admiral could barely believe what they were seeing. The child was in full control, never once second-guessing their actions. They led their ships in coordinated patterns, avoiding deadly fire and launching counterattacks with a mix of speed and creativity. The child was able to predict every enemy move before it happened, using tactics that should have been impossible for someone so young. The Admiral had read reports of humans' adaptability, but this was something else. "Impressive," the Admiral murmured, underestimating the child's ability. But now the Admiral's eyes were widening as they began to understand. The simulations weren't just about winning. They were a test of creativity, of how a commander could think outside the box, improvise under pressure, and overcome overwhelming odds. The child didn't just play. They learned. They evolved. They dominated. The battle unfolded further, with new threats emerging faster than ever before. But the child was one step ahead of every new challenge. They maneuvered their fleet into perfect formation, leading a decoy ship straight into the heart of an enemy formation. The enemy ships took the bait and followed, allowing the child to flank them and destroy them with deadly precision. The Admiral's heart skipped a beat as they watched. The child's tactics mirrored those of an experienced commander. No better. The child wasn't merely playing. They were orchestrating the entire battle as if they were born to be in command. Every decision felt organic, natural, as if the child had an innate understanding of warfare that most seasoned generals could only dream of. Finally, after a relentless string of skirmishes, the simulation ended. The child leaned back in the chair, looking entirely unfazed, a slight grin spreading across their face. It was as though they had just completed a simple task rather than a battle of unprecedented complexity. The Admiral stood silent for a moment, the weight of what they had witnessed settling over them. "Do you do this often?" the Admiral asked, their voice now tinged with both awe and caution. The child nodded, still smiling. "I guess I just like figuring things out. It's fun." The Admiral could hardly believe their ears. Fun. This wasn't just fun. This was terrifying. This was a child who had just outwitted an entire fleet of the Admiral's own species, albeit in a simulation. What would happen when this child, when humanity, faced real threats? The Admiral realized, with a sinking feeling, that humanity was not just playing games. They were preparing for something far greater, and the galaxy wasn't ready for them. The Admiral stood frozen for a moment, watching the child with a mixture of admiration and unease. The room around them seemed to fade, the hum of the station's machinery growing distant as their thoughts raced. The child, this child, was something else entirely. There was no denying the raw potential the human species had. The way the child navigated the simulations, the sheer instinctive genius that seemed to pour from every movement, made it clear that humanity was no ordinary species. But there was something more to it, something the Admiral couldn't quite put their finger on. Breaking the silence, the Admiral spoke carefully. "You're very skilled, child. Tell me, how do you think of your strategies? Do you study military tactics?" The child looked up from the console, their eyes wide with innocence, but beneath that simplicity, there was something calculating. "I don't really study anything. I just play and figure it out. I think about what I would do if I were the enemy." The Admiral blinked, taken aback by the child's answer. Figure it out. This wasn't just playing. This was intuitive, a kind of thinking that came naturally to the child, as though they could sense the battlefield itself. And it wasn't just the child's ability to react that stood out, it was their proactive nature. They didn't just wait for things to happen. They shaped the battlefield, led it, controlled it. It was as though the child had an innate understanding of warfare that transcended formal training, as if they had lived through hundreds of battles before. The Admiral moved closer, kneeling down so they were at eye level with the child, who continued to fiddle with the controls, their focus unwavering. "So, when you fight, you don't just react, you anticipate. You feel what the enemy is going to do next." The child nodded without missing a beat. "Yeah, sometimes I think of it like a game of chess. You know, you can guess what they'll do based on what they've done before. It's kind of fun to outsmart them." The Admiral's mind spun. Chess, a simple game to the human mind, yet a powerful metaphor for war. Was that how humans saw conflict? As a game to be won or lost. That thought both intrigued and worried the Admiral. In their experience, conflict was never a game. It was about survival, dominance, and power. But the child spoke of it as though it were a puzzle to be solved. That simplicity, that innate understanding, was a dangerous combination. "And what about when things don't go according to plan?" the Admiral asked, trying to dig deeper. "What do you do then?" Without hesitation, the child's eyes glinted with determination. I make a new plan. I think of something they won't expect, and then I do it. The Admiral's gaze softened slightly as they watched the child, but the unease only grew. There was no fear in the child's words, no hesitation. It was as if the child could face down an entire enemy fleet and not break a sweat. But the Admiral also realized something deeper. That same attitude, that refusal to give up, to adapt and find a solution, was the very essence of humanity's strength. The human spirit was unstoppable, always seeking new ways to overcome adversity. As the child returned to the simulation and began setting up another round, the Admiral leaned back, considering the implications of what they had learned. Humanity was far more advanced than they'd ever imagined. The child's ability to think on their feet, to process so much information so quickly, was not only a gift, it was a weapon. And as the Admiral looked at the young face in front of them, they realized that humanity's future was anything but predictable. It was bright, dangerous, and filled with potential beyond measure. But more than that, humanity's future would be driven by this very type of child. Children who would grow up with this kind of strategic brilliance, this way of thinking that bent the rules of traditional warfare. The galaxy had underestimated humans for too long, but that would soon change. The Admiral couldn't shake the thought as they watched the child move through the simulation, hands flying across the console, strategizing their next move. No, the humans weren't just playing games anymore. They were preparing for something far greater than anyone could have imagined. And the Admiral was beginning to wonder if the galaxy was ready for them. The Admiral took a step back, contemplating the weight of what they had just witnessed. The child's movements were effortless, as if commanding fleets in battle was as natural as breathing. The simulation was now a mere background noise as the child's eyes flicked between the screen and the rapidly shifting pieces of strategy in their mind. It was no longer a game. It was something far more profound. Humanity had always been known for its ingenuity, its ability to adapt and innovate at an extraordinary pace. But what the Admiral had just seen, this child, playing with a level of skill that most seasoned commanders could only dream of, was something new, something different. The child didn't just command. They embodied the very essence of warfare, of command itself, and the Admiral had no idea how deep that well of potential might run. The child glanced up at the Admiral, the same confident smile on their face, as though they had done nothing remarkable. "Are you going to try to beat me this time?" The child asked, their tone light and teasing, almost playful. The Admiral, still processing what they had seen, couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity, mixed with unease. The child was absolutely fearless, and it wasn't just in the simulation. It was in the way they looked at the Admiral, the way they spoke, as if victory was not an option, but a certainty. "Tell me something," the Admiral said, their voice suddenly more serious. "Have you ever lost in one of these simulations?" The child tilted their head, considering the question. "Well, sometimes it takes longer to win, but I don't really lose. I just keep trying until I figure it out." The Admiral's brow furrowed. There was something profound in those words, something that spoke to the resilience of humanity, to its ability to keep pushing forward in the face of failure, to learn and adapt no matter the odds. "Why do you keep going?" the Admiral asked. "Why not just stop when things get hard?" The child's face softened, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability that flickered across their expression. "Because if you stop, you never learn. If you never try again, you won't get better. And I want to get better." The Admiral stood motionless, their heart beating a little faster. The simplicity of the child's answer was profound. There was no arrogance, no cockiness, just an unwavering resolve. The child wasn't driven by ego. They were driven by the need to improve, to constantly push their limits. It was a mindset that not only applied to games or simulations, but to every aspect of life. "And what if you fail?" the Admiral pressed. The child smiled, the confidence in their expression returning. "Then I try again. And when I do win, It feels like I've earned it." A quiet silence fell over the room as the Admiral considered the child's words. The child's philosophy mirrored the very essence of human nature: resilience, determination, and an unwavering belief in self-improvement. But there was something else, something deeper: the instinct to never back down, to turn the tide no matter the challenge. The child's drive could be felt, like an energy that radiated from them, and the Admiral couldn't shake the feeling that this was something that ran through humanity as a whole. A relentless spirit. "Tell me," the Admiral said, shifting their gaze to the screen where the child's simulated fleet was swiftly decimating the enemy. "Do all humans think like you? Is this how your species fights?" The child shrugged, focusing on the battle. "I don't know. I think we all have our own way of doing things, but if you really want to win, you have to think like you're always going to win, even if things don't go your way. You can't let anything stop you." The Admiral's mind raced as they watched the child's fleet outmaneuver and dismantle the simulation's artificial opponents. The Admiral had spent years studying war, strategy, tactics, psychology, but nothing they had seen had prepared them for this. The child wasn't just thinking about war, they were feeling it. They were in sync with the battle, as if their very essence connected them to the outcome. And this wasn't just one child. No, the Admiral could already imagine the hundreds, the thousands of human children growing up with this kind of mentality. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war, they were preparing to redefine it. With a deep breath, the Admiral straightened up, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, but that mistake was about to be corrected. The human species would not just be another player in the great galactic stage. They were destined to be the ones who changed everything. And the Admiral had the unsettling feeling that they had just seen the beginning. The Admiral stood silently, watching the child's every movement as their fleet dismantled the enemy forces in the simulation with surgical precision. Each move seemed almost preordained, as if the child had already seen the future and was simply guiding their ships along a path they knew would lead to victory. The Admiral had seen many commanders, many species, try and fail to achieve such levels of expertise, yet here was this young human, seemingly pulling off feats no seasoned officer could replicate. The weight of the realization hit the Admiral hard. This child was no anomaly. This child represented something much larger: humanity itself. The entire species was imbued with an untapped potential, an innate understanding of conflict, problem-solving, and strategy. It was more than just instinct. It was something wired deep within their DNA. The Admiral had thought the simulations would provide insights into human tactics, but they had only uncovered the surface of something far more terrifying. The child finished off the simulation with another flawless victory, the last enemy ship disintegrating in a brilliant flash of light. With a satisfied sigh, the child leaned back in the chair, their small hands resting on the console. "Do you want to try it?" the child asked, looking up at the Admiral. "You could play too, if you want. It's really fun." The Admiral didn't respond immediately. Their mind was still processing the implications of everything they had just witnessed. They had expected to observe a training exercise, but what they had encountered was something far greater. Humanity, it seemed, was already capable of far more than any species in the galaxy had realized. There was something dangerous in that, something that could shift the balance of power in ways the Admiral hadn't fully understood until now. "No," the Admiral replied finally, their voice steady but with an underlying edge of caution. "I'm not here to play games." The child blinked in surprise, as though the very idea of not playing was a foreign concept to them. They shrugged and began resetting the simulation for another round. The Admiral's gaze never left the child, studying their every action, their every shift in focus. The child wasn't just skilled in the simulation. They were born to command, born to lead. The way they processed information, the way they adjusted to each new challenge, was something the Admiral had never encountered before. It was as though the child's mind could bend reality itself to fit their will. "You should stop," the Admiral said quietly, finally speaking their mind. "You're far beyond what any training program should be able to produce. If you keep pushing yourself like this, if humans keep growing at this rate, the galaxy won't be able to handle it." The child paused mid-motion, looking up at the Admiral with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "What do you mean? It's just a game." I think it's fun." The Admiral closed their eyes for a moment, feeling a pang of unease. The child didn't understand the gravity of their words. To them, this was a game, a challenge. To the Admiral, however, it was a glimpse into the future, a future where humanity could, without question, overthrow even the mightiest of civilizations if they so desired. "It's not just a game," the Admiral said softly. "When you fight, when you command, you aren't just playing. You're shaping the outcome. And humans like you could very well change the entire galaxy." The child tilted their head, processing the Admiral's words, but the Admiral could tell that their attention was already shifting back to the simulation. They weren't concerned with the larger picture. They were focused on the now, on the moment, on victory. The Admiral's gaze grew distant as they watched the child reset the simulation again, a cold realization settling in. Humanity had always been driven by ambition, by a relentless pursuit of progress. But what they had just witnessed, this child, this natural-born strategist, was more than ambition. It was instinct. The way the human mind worked, the way it could adapt, learn, and outsmart its foes, was something that would make them an unstoppable force if left unchecked. The Admiral turned slowly, taking one last look at the child, who was now absorbed in the next round of combat, their fingers flying over the controls with ease. The galaxy would not be ready for what was coming. Humanity, driven by children like this one, was going to change the rules of everything. The Admiral stood there, watching the child with a growing sense of dread. The quiet hum of the simulation filled the room as the child continued their game, a faint smile tugging at their lips. It was a smile that spoke not of innocence, but of something far more unnerving, confidence. It was as though the child already knew the outcome before the battle even began. The Admiral felt the tension in the air, the palpable weight of what humanity might become, and a knot formed in their stomach. The Admiral's mind raced, running through countless scenarios. A fleet of humans, each child, each commander wielding the same natural brilliance, the same intuitive grasp of strategy, the same unrelenting drive to improve and outthink their opponents. What kind of force could they become? What would the galaxy look like in the hands of such a species? The thought sent a shiver down the Admiral's spine. Humanity could very well tip the balance of power in ways that no one could predict, let alone control. The child, oblivious to the Admiral's growing concern, launched yet another attack on the enemy fleet. The child's movements were fluid and precise, effortlessly adapting to each new threat that emerged. The simulation was no longer just a test of speed and skill. It was a display of pure brilliance, an art form of warfare, played out in the most intricate of patterns. And each victory, each move, felt like a reminder of how dangerous this species had the potential to be. The child glanced up from the console, catching the Admiral's eye, and for a moment, there was something curious in their expression. "You look serious," the child remarked, their voice light and untroubled. "Is something wrong?" The Admiral, startled from their thoughts, hesitated before answering. They had to choose their words carefully. The last thing they wanted was to scare the child or make them feel like a threat. After all, the child wasn't the problem. It was the sheer potential of what they represented, the promise of a species that could turn the tide of the galaxy with nothing more than their sheer will to learn and adapt. "No," the Admiral finally replied, their voice steady but thoughtful. "I'm just thinking." The child nodded, as if satisfied with that answer, and returned to the controls, utterly unfazed. The Admiral continued to watch, unable to pull their gaze away. There was a quiet awe in their observation, mixed with a mounting sense of urgency. They had to act. The Admiral could no longer ignore the implications of what they were seeing. Humanity was advancing at a pace that was both astonishing and terrifying. The Admiral could already see the ripples it would cause across the galaxy. What would happen when entire fleets of humans, trained like this child, emerged from their planets, ready to face any challenge? What would happen when the galaxy no longer held the advantage of experience or power, but was instead caught off guard by an entirely new breed of warrior? The Admiral could almost hear the echoes of war as they watched the child. The child wasn't just playing a game. They were learning, adapting, and growing. They were becoming something more than a soldier. They were becoming a force of nature. It wasn't hard to imagine that one day, perhaps soon, that child would be leading a real battle, commanding fleets, deciding the fate of entire systems. The thought was chilling. The child completed the simulation, as effortlessly as before, and leaned back in the chair. The smile on their face was wide and triumphant, as if victory was the only logical outcome. But the Admiral noticed something else, something that made their hearts skip a beat. The child's eyes weren't just filled with satisfaction. They were filled with curiosity, with hunger. Hunger for more. Hunger to push further, to evolve. The child turned to the Admiral, a look of genuine interest on their face. "What do you think? Was it a good fight?" The Admiral stood silent, their mind grappling with the enormity of what was unfolding. "Yes," the Admiral said finally, their voice low and heavy with a mix of awe and apprehension. "It was a good fight. But remember, child, this is only the beginning." The child smiled again, their expression one of innocent mischief. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep getting better." And with those words, the Admiral knew that they were standing at the precipice of something massive, something beyond the Admiral's control, something that would change the galaxy forever. The child wasn't just playing a game. They were preparing for war. And humanity, with all its brilliance and determination, was coming. The Admiral watched the child, the weight of their words lingering in the air like a storm cloud. There was no denying the truth in them. The child was not merely a strategist in training, not just a mind playing games. They were something more. Humanity as a whole was something more. The raw potential the child represented was not an isolated incident. It was an entire species. And the Admiral was beginning to realize that this was only the beginning of what humanity could become. The child, oblivious to the growing storm in the Admiral's mind, stood up from the console with a stretch, their smile still intact. "Do you want to try now?" they asked again, their voice light and unconcerned. But the Admiral knew better. "No," the Admiral said, shaking their head. "I've seen enough." The Admiral turned to leave, but the child's voice stopped them in their tracks. "Are you scared?" The question, simple as it was, hit the Admiral with the force of a sledgehammer. They turned back, meeting the child's wide, curious gaze. The child had no fear, no awareness of the implications of what they were capable of. They were so young, so innocent, yet so terrifyingly brilliant. "I'm not scared," the Admiral replied after a long pause, their voice firm but filled with a somber understanding. "But I am concerned. Do you understand what you're capable of?" The child's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know. I'm just playing." "Isn't that what everyone does?" The Admiral exhaled slowly, trying to process the weight of the situation. The child saw nothing wrong in what they were doing. To them, it was just a game, just another challenge to conquer. But to the Admiral, it was a warning that humanity had reached a point where this game would soon turn into something far more dangerous. The child's potential for leadership, for military command, was only the tip of the iceberg. It was only a matter of time before they and others like them began to realize the full extent of their power. "The galaxy isn't ready for humanity," the Admiral murmured to themselves, more to the air than the child. The child, still standing beside the console, seemed to not hear them, or perhaps they just didn't understand. They were too young to grasp the weight of the Admiral's words. They didn't know that the galaxy had been peaceful for far too long, and that such peace had come at the cost of keeping humanity in check. A species like theirs, a species so driven, so instinctively brilliant, could change everything with a single push. The child stepped forward, their hands on the console again, looking up at the Admiral. "But what's wrong with it? I just want to keep getting better. And if I can win, then I can do even more. Right?" The Admiral's eyes softened for a moment, but then a grim resolve hardened their features. "Yes, child. You can. But know this. When you get better, when humanity gets better, there are those who will see you as a threat, and they will try to stop you. Your species won't be able to play games forever. It will become real." The child blinked at them, the weight of the Admiral's words slowly starting to settle in, but only for a moment. It was clear they didn't yet fully understand. How could they? How could anyone understand the true cost of such raw, untamed potential? "Then I'll just keep winning," the child said, a quiet determination growing in their voice. "If I can win, I'll just keep getting better, and one day, I'll be able to help everyone. I can be the best, and if I'm the best, I'll make things better for everyone. That's what I'll do." The Admiral stared at the child for a long moment, unable to speak. The child wasn't scared. They didn't fear what the Admiral feared. They only saw the path ahead, their eyes filled with a kind of certainty that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The child was right, in a way. If they continued to grow, continued to adapt, continued to improve, there was no limit to what they could achieve. And that was what frightened the Admiral most of all. Humanity wasn't simply learning to fight. It was learning to shape the very future of the galaxy, and there would be no stopping them once they reached that point. The Admiral turned toward the door once more, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what was to come. Humanity had always been underestimated, always seen as a fleeting species on the edge of the galaxy. But now, the Admiral realized with a cold clarity, humanity wasn't a species of the future. They were the future. And the galaxy, for better or for worse, would never be the same again.